I'm Hilary Russell, director of the Berkshire Boat Building School, and as you can see, we've begun what's going to be a double paddle canoe, about 13.5 feet long. Strong backs in place. We've got the forms cut and in place. We have the keel stringer in place. If you're wondering what this closet pole is for, it helps keep everything down flat because the ribs push up pretty hard when we put them in. So we just leave that on. We'll tighten it up after we get everything fixed. And then, of course, it's not part of the boat. It'll come off, and these aren't part of the boat, and the strong back isn't. This video is obviously not showing everything. I'm focusing on the things that, frankly, are better seen than just read about. Now we're going to try to figure out exactly where to cut this stem here. This is the stem, the knee, and we're putting this all together with the keel stringer and the deck. You see I've drawn a line here. I want to show you how I got the line. First of all, this has been clamped for 48 hours. Let's see what happens. Boing. Now, it was overbent. So I'm cool with the fact that it came up. If I hadn't stepped this down, it wouldn't have been bent enough, and we'd have a boat that would probably hog. So I like this. However, it does take some kind of feeling. I want this keel stringer to bend a little bit down, and it is, right? So, and I'm using this tool for something it isn't made for. It's just a way to extend this surface here, out here, so I can draw a line. Okay, so that's how I got this line. And I'm going to take it over to my bandsaw. I'll cut it, bring it back, and see how it works. When you're in a boat and you see one of these in the bow, you're going to be looking at it a lot. So it's nice to round this over a little bit, clean it up. It's one of those things you don't always think of when you're in a hurry, but it's worth it. Okay, this can be fixed later on, this little gap here, and I'll show you how we do it. We just kerf cut it. All right, that's pretty good. I just want to say that we knocked this edge in just a hair, just there. So the gunnels are a little proud here on purpose because I want the deck to stick up a little bit, and you'll see that when we turn it over. All right, now the next step will be to drill a hole and put a screw in just like that. Here's our basic steamer. These ribs have been in for about 20 minutes. They're about 5/16 thick, and they say it's about an inch an hour. So that's my estimate. We'll see how they work. You have about a minute, really, to bend these, so you want to get right at it. Okay. Okay, now I'm just going to stand here until we're ready to put it in. There you go, right here, number 3. Okay. Push it right up and get a clamp on it. Now, put a clamp on the bottom first, and it should be touching everywhere. If you can do it with one clamp, fine, but if you didn't push it up enough, like say here, you might want to put a clamp up there. Gotcha. And then later we'll hit the bottom of it with a hammer and try to push it up that way. Just right in here, straight up. And then push it all the way up so it's almost entirely up. In other words, there's only about a ½ inch or an inch below the line. Yeah, that's it, that's it. Pull it up from the top and put it right on number 3 there. So you've seen us now, we've put in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ribs. We only have 4 more to go in the middle of the boat, and then later we'll put one in at each end. Remember, ribs are sort of like our ribs. They go around the boat. These pieces that go up and down the boat are called stringers. And I'm not going to go into too much detail except to point out that this one is obviously a different shape. It's beefier, and I can talk more about that later. These two are the typical ones we're going to have, and this one is not typical, but it's bigger and stronger, and it's going to help the boat hold its shape. So when we put these ribs in, that are going to want to push things out or pull things in. So, and together, all 8 of these new pieces form a kind of cage for us to bend the ribs into. Okay, I'm afraid the steamer's telling me I've got to stop. We've got a few more ribs coming out. We've got our first set of stringers, the 8-sided 5/8 ones, in place. Now we're going to start lashing these. When we get this pair done, we'll go to another pair. This is called imitation sinew. It's not hard to find. I tell you some places in my book where you can buy it, and you can buy it at most craft stores. It's polyester tape. They call it tape because it's flat, and it's waxed, which is great because it doesn't slip around. We're going again to the other side of our stringer. I'm going to go under the rib, this time double. Make sure the ends are about the same. We're going to come up, and we're going to go over the top. Notice now we're sort of automatically going over twice because the string is doubled. And I take my loose ends, put them under the rib on the near side of the stringer, like that. Now here's the interesting part, the best part, but probably the most challenging. We have to make what's called a lark's mouth here. That's what it is. And we stick our 2 loose ends through it. Now, as we crank down, we want to make sure the lark's mouth tightens down here somewhere, not on top, because it'll just leave a bump, and you don't want bumps. Okay, now I'm going to crank it down, and I think it should end up nicely on the side, like that. Now, the thing is that lark's mouth holds pretty well. So later on, we're going to be lashing some pieces together that don't want to go together, and they actually have to bend them, and the lark's mouth will hold them for you. So they're pretty good. If these 2 pieces weren't quite tight enough, you could do that and crank down in your lark's mouth, and they'd stay until you did what you did on the last one, which is now you separate your 2. You go around the sides, just as you did on the first lashing. Do your double overhand. Bing, bing. Tighten it up. Come back. Again, no X's. You're not crisscrossing. You're just going around the sides. Another double lashing. And then we tie it off. All right, just a quick review. The 8-sided stringer is in place. Remember, we used a story stick. This is spot number 1. It lines up pretty well, and we go right down to 3 and 5, and it lines up pretty well. Although it does tend to move, and that's part of the skin boat. So we'll talk more about that. We also put in the bottom stringer here. That was easy. We just used a 4-inch piece of wood and spaced these things 4 inches up from the gunnel. Notice, even though this fit a little while ago, it's a slight difference now, and we're going to work with that. Now we're going to put in 2 more of these batten type stringers. How do you know where they go? Well, one way to give yourself confidence is to put a couple on like this, plant them next door, and fool around with them until you get them so they're spaced equally. Put some marks, and then those marks will be there when you put the permanent ones in. These give you confidence, but they don't necessarily do it perfectly. The best judge is after you've clamped them in, take a look at them from the length and then move them around until they look good. If they look good, they are good. I'm going to show you how we trim the ends of the stringers so they fit nicely against the stem and the knee. So as the skin comes around, it's just going to come around smoothly and not catch the end of the stringer. We pull the stringer up so it's even with this line, which is where it's going to end up. And I put a spacer in here and push down a little bit and draw a line. And now we'd also like to get an angle to cut it at, which is roughly the same as the line going down. This is a fairly aggressive pull saw, and that's good because these are very typically wet. So you're cutting wet wood, and it's hard to cut. But I'm going to finish this with a pull saw, and you can see how that works. Have to twist the handle a little bit to make sure I follow this line or roughly follow it. Otherwise, I'll go straight down, and I don't want to do that. I want to go at an angle out the way the stem goes. Okay, so let's see. This is a pretty good job. We can clean it up a little bit on the bottom, and then I'll drill a couple of holes here, and we'll lash it. Okay, this is the needle and thread, and it's the same imitation sinew I've been using. It's just a longer length, almost twice as long as the lengths I needed over with the rest of the boat. I'm going to start on top because the top is the bottom. Remember, the boat's upside down. Of course, the fact is most of this is going to be out of sight anyway because it's tucked into the very bow or stern of the boat. I'm going through double, so going just around twice is four strands, and that's really enough. The lashing is finished. You can see we made some nice inside cuts here and glued the stringers tight. As we move up the boat, we've got our little last rib in. It's actually two parts, dead straight or almost straight. Hasn't been steamed at all because we want to pull the ends of the boats in a little bit. I think we placed these two center stringers pretty well. Remember, we had this one on, the 8-sided one. We had the bottom one on that was 4 inches up. And I showed you how we could place these. It took maybe 10 minutes to figure it out. And they look good on both sides of the boat. And one last thing, these big 8-sided stringers give us beef on the bottom, and they raise things up a bit, so the bottom is almost flat. You don't want it dead flat, but for stability, it's nice to have it flat-ish. So that's worked out pretty well. Now we're going to pop the boat up, set her down, turn her right side up, and install the Inwales. Okay, I've got a little square here, and the point is to come directly up from that line. Now, okay, now I've got the top, and I have to get another angle, the other angle, which is this one. Okay, so I'm going to transfer it to here. Okay. And there's my cut. And of course, I'm going to not only cut to the outside of the line, I'm going to leave a little white space between the pencil line and my cut. Now, it's a little long, which is the way you want it. So we have that one all done there. The other gunnel is all clamped up with a clamp at every rib and a couple at the end because it tends to slip sometimes at the end. And this one is ready to be clamped. I just wanted you to see that it's a little big and we're going to have to really force it in. And that's good. It's called springing the inwale. It creates even pressure the whole length of the boat. So over time, when the boat wants to change shape, you've got this outward pressure holding it in the position we put it in. So here we are. It's pretty tight already. But notice it's loose at the end. The ends are always problematic because there's a lot of extra material. We've got it nice and smooth the length of the boat until you get to the ends. And actually this one isn't bad, but we'll meet a second person to help pull that end tight. So this is what I've been doing so far. Notice I can actually pick the boat up. This is this wonderful polyester wax sinew that we use to lash the boat together with. Look at all this extra twine I've got here, or sinew, I mean. So now we're going to start stapling along the gunnels, and we'll go within 2 or 3 feet of the ends, and then we'll stop and again get that second person to pull on the ends for us. But right now we want to put between 9 and 10 staples between ribs. You don't need to put a staple there because there's a hole there and it's going to have a screw in it later. So just not, I might. Now, see that staple's a little well below the middle of the gunnel. I would like it at the middle or below, but not above. And the reason is we're going to be putting another piece of wood over that called the rub rail. And we want that rub rail to fit tightly against the gunnel. So we don't want the staples way up here. Plus, of course, if it's too high, after we cut the skin, it might just pull through. The skin is going to have to be trimmed right about here to let that extra piece of wood fit tightly. It's good to use the offhand to pull the material tight as you're doing it. Okay, that's as far as I want to go. At this point, we're going to turn the boat upside down. If you can get someone to help you, I think that's advisable, and we'll seal up the end. Okay, so things are actually pretty good. However, see right here, kind of a soft spot. I'm going to see if I can get rid of that just by clamping my hand there, see? And then Troy will be pulling a little bit from the end. Notice he makes sure he's pulling material that's not going to be part of the boat, because you actually can stretch the material and leave a fingerprint that's very hard to come out. I don't mean a greasy fingertip, I mean a dent made by a finger. I've got the gunnels all stapled, and I'll show you how to do the ends. I always start where there's a little bit of loose material above, up here, above my first staple, because sooner or later I'm going to have to pull that material across, and it'd be nice to cover all the staples, at least the first row, and not leave some bare wood, which can happen. Okay, let's see how that's going to work. Now we cut this with a soldering iron because it seals the ends and there won't be any fraying. So I'm starting a little bit higher and I'm going right out to the edge of the stem. And now I'm using the edge as a guide. All right, now we're going to pull this across and staple some more. Put this staple in to try to tack down the material here. See, I've left room between the original staples to go in here. Now the last part is the most difficult because when I'm trimming this, I could go through and trim material that's going to be on the boat. By the way, if you do it, you can fix it. Patching is very, very easy. I leave a little flap here at the end. We fix it up later. I try to cut it halfway between the staple and the top of the gunnel, something like this. Notice that we've trimmed off all the extra material. We've hammered in the staples and we're ready to shrink the skin. I typically use a heat gun because it's fast and efficient. However, if you've never done this before, you might want to use an iron. It's a little slower, but it's safer because you can control the heat. The other thing I want to mention is don't linger over a lashing because eventually the wax that's on the lashing material will melt and leave a stain on the boat. Let me just show you how I do it. I have a rule that I never stay in one place more than 5 seconds, if that. Skin's nice and tight. Took about 20 minutes. Might take a half an hour. Now we're going to waterproof it, and I want to say a few things about that. There are 3 ways to go in my book. There are probably more. One is you can put a little polyurethane. I always use water base. I happen to use Czar. It works for me. I've also used Varathane. I thin it out on the first coat. I put on at least 5 coats, maybe up to 8 or 10. It depends how much you want to fill the weave. Filling the weave totally takes an awful lot of coats with the polyurethane I use. Okay, a second way is to use a couple of coats of poly, just as I described, and then paint it. The third way is use 2-base polyurethane that you can find at skinboats.org. Corey Friedman is the owner of that organization. It's a great boat building school in Anacortes, Washington. And this is a wonderful product. It's the strongest of the 3 things I've mentioned. The downside is it's 2 parts. Because it's 2-part, it's tricky to use. It's really hard to avoid drips. If you know you're going to drag your boat around, use it. If you're prepared to get in and out of your boat from the water, in other words, keep it floating, you're not going to shoot any rapids if you can possibly avoid it. In other words, if you just are careful, you're fine with the water-based poly, in my opinion. I've had a boat for 15 years. I've taken it out to the Boundary Waters. I've taken it all over the Adirondacks and all around here in the Berkshires, on rivers, on lakes, on ponds. I do avoid quick water when I can, and I usually can. If I come to a beaver dam, I usually pick the boat up, but not always. Sometimes if I'm lazy, I just carefully pole across and make sure there aren't any sharp sticks pointing in my direction. Okay, here we have our solo tandem double paddle canoe, 13.5 feet long, 28 inches wide, and only 24 pounds, which is amazing. You'll be able to carry it around on one shoulder. I think we've hit all the difficult parts of building this boat. And if you want more detail, then I suggest you should have more detail. Take a look at our book on our website, BerkshireBoatBuildingSchool.org.